someone like to make a motion to return the regular board meeting to public session, please? Mrs. Van Sice, second. Dr. McClary, all in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Carries unanimously. I'd like to call the regular board meeting to order. All board members are present. I would like to ask Mr. Mecca, would you please lead us in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be advised that in the event of a fire emergency and an evacuation should be necessary, an alarm will sound. Please note that all marked emergency exits and evacuate well away from the building. At this time, we do request that you please turn off your cell phone, or at the very least mute it, and any other electronic devices that are on you. Thank you. Would someone like to make a motion to add an addendum to the personnel consent agenda at a second executive session and approve the agenda as amended, please? Mrs. Leatherbarrow, is there a second? Mrs. Van Sice, all in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Dr. Martzoff, would you like to do the recognition?
Thank you, Mr. LeMay. Tonight we are pleased to recognize one of our outstanding teachers. Susan Raccoon is a math and computer science teacher at North High School, where she has taught for the past decade. Mrs. Raccoon is one of 7 mathematics and science teachers in New York State who have been named finalists for the 2016-17 Presidential Awards for Excellence in Mathematics and Science Teaching at the secondary level. This award is one of the highest honors in the nation for teachers of mathematics and science, recognizing not only outstanding teaching, but also leadership in the field. With us tonight is North High School Principal Gary Colicchio, who will tell us more about this impressive award and introduce Ms. Raccoon. Mr. Colicchio?
Thank you, Dr. Martzoff. Good evening, everyone. Only the really dedicated people showed up tonight. Thank you, Dr. Martzoff, for recognizing Sue Raccoon as a New York State finalist for the Presidential Award for Excellence in Mathematics Teaching. As you would expect the case to be with all of the nominees of this prestigious award, Sue is a master teacher who is highly effective in the classroom. If you happen to walk by her room when she is teaching, you instantly become aware of her student-centered approach and the great connections that she makes with her students. Sue's teaching assignments this year range from sections of Accelerated Regents Algebra 2 to Exploring Computer Science and Advanced Placement Computer Science. What's not obvious to those who do not work in our building is her influence outside the classroom as a mentor and role model for our students. Sue and her good friend and colleague Julie Johnson created and initiated our North High School Computer Club. She also encouraged and facilitated a Saturday morning computer programming activity for middle school girls to generate interest in the field. Last year, when we planned to put structures in place to help struggling North math students through the vehicle of 6th assignment volunteers, Sue was the first department member to offer her services. Her instructional influence consistently reaches beyond the classroom. Sue, I know that you have been nervous about this moment all day, but we are very proud of your accomplishments at the state level and for your many contributions to our North community. I present to you Ms. Sue Raccoon.
Thank you, Mr. Colicchio. It is definitely a pleasure to work under your strong and caring leadership. Thank you. Superintendent Martzoff and distinguished board members, thank you for this recognition. There are numerous teachers that deserve honors and recognition for the work they do in and out of the classroom every day. I'm so much better in front of 15-year-olds. Teaching is hard work. Staying current in advances in technology is hard work. And math and computer science can be hard work. However, there's nothing that I would rather be doing every day. With the support of my colleagues at Williamsville North High School, Dr. Chris McGinley, an awesome instructional specialist, and my ever-nurturing family, especially my husband, it has been a pleasure to work this hard and earn this recognition. Thank you for your support and this recognition tonight. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any board acknowledgements this month? Nope. Okay. Do we have anybody for public expression?
We do not have anyone signed up for public expression this evening, unless there's someone interested in coming to speak at the microphone at this time.
Okay, moving on. Would someone like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda and addendum as presented, please? Dr. McClary, thank you. Second? Mrs. Van Cise, thank you. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Nothing. Motion carries unanimously. I would like to thank the following retirees for the service to the district. Susan Goraj, Maple West Elementary part-time teacher aide for 21 years of service, and Bertha Hall, High Middle part-time teacher aide for 15 years of service. I'd also like to thank the Williamsville Education Foundation for grants totaling $8,382, which will fund 18 different projects, and the Williamsville North High School class of 2017 for the $1,115 to fund the new signage in the north hallways. Thank you. Would someone like to make a motion to approve the minutes of the regular board meeting held on November 14th, 2017? Mrs. Beeger, second. Mrs. Leatherbarrow, are there any corrections, additions, or discussion regarding the minutes? Okay. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Yep. Motion carries 801 with Dr. Venator abstaining. Would someone like to make a motion to approve the minutes of the special board meeting held on November the 18th, 2017? Mrs. Van Cise, is there a second? Mrs. Leatherbarrow, are there any corrections or additions to these minutes? All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Mr. Mecca, how'd you vote? Did you abstain?
Sorry, no,
Did you abstain?
no,
Were you there?
yes,
Okay,
sorry about that.
thank you. So the motion carries 702.
Wait a minute.
Mr. Mecca, you were there?
He was not there. He abstained.
Okay, sorry, yeah,
You did abstain.
sorry, I
That's what I was asking. Yes, okay.
understood.
You abstain then. Okay, so
Abstain.
that motion carries 603. Mr. Mecca, Mrs. Vasquez, and Dr. Venator abstaining.
Sorry for the confusion.
Thank you. Not a problem. Dr. McClary, Mr. Mecca, and I attended the DECA dinner and installation ceremony on November the 20th at Classics 5 on Niagara Falls Boulevard to a great evening. Dr. McClary, Mrs. Van Cise, and I attended the Speed Board Dessert Forum on November the 16th and submitted reports. Does anyone have any questions or anything, comments about any of those events? Okay. I also attended the Dessert Forum on December the 7th. I think that wraps up the Erie County Association of School Boards. Does anybody else have anything else to add under the ECASB? No. The New York State School Board Association. I don't have anything under there. Does anybody have anything to add under that? Nope. The board's first community forum this year was held on Saturday, November the 18th, 2017, 9 a.m. until noon at the East High School in the Commons. Mrs. Leatherbarrow, Mrs. Beeger, Mrs. Van Sice, Dr. McClary, Mr. Meyer, and I attended and addressed concerns from community members. Mrs. Leatherbarrow, would you like to give us a quick recap on the event?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I thought the turnout was really good. There was plenty of people there to keep our conversation going for the full time. The main topics that were raised were meeting the needs of special education students, adding Chinese as a foreign language option. There were requests from the Chinese school regarding the Saturday program at North High School. There was some discussion regarding how to access translation services, for ENL parents for the PTSA purposes. There was some discussion regarding class rank and more conversation regarding expanding the gifted programs at the schools. So lots of different topics discussed and plenty of good conversation.
Great, thank you. It was an excellent 3 hours. I do encourage anybody in the audience or watching this online or listening to it to please attend our next community forum. These are open to the community, teachers, administrators, assistant superintendents, you name it. Anybody related to education in the Williamsville Central School District, we encourage you to come out and have a two-way conversation with us. Our next community forum will be on Wednesday, January the 31st, 2018 at 7 p.m. Now, this is an effort to serve the community members that normally can't come on the Saturday, so we're having our first Wednesday evening community forum. It will be on a shorter schedule. We usually have these for 3 hours. That night we will be 7 p.m. until 9 p.m., so it will be a 2-hour. And that'll be in the North High School cafeteria. The next visitation is Friday, December the 15th at North High School for board visitation. Mrs. Leatherbarrow, Mrs. Beeger, Mrs. Van Sice, and I plan on attending. Is anyone else available here at the board table to attend that day? No? The board will visit East High School on January the 5th at 8:45 a.m. I've got down Dr. McClary, Mrs. Vasquez, Mr. Meyer, and myself attending. Anybody else possibly can attend that? Check your schedules. Mrs. Leatherbarrow, that would be great.
Possible.
You're possible. Perfect. Thank you. If anyone else can finagle their schedules and attend, we'd love to have you. Let either myself or Mrs. Seraphin know, please. Mr. Meyer last month asked about us considering adding a second public expression to our regular board meeting. Mr. Meyer, I'm going to turn the microphone over to you, and you can lead us in a discussion on this, if you would, please.
Sure. So I think there's 4 points I'd like to start off by making. One, we often talk about increasing public participation. I think by adding a second round of public expression, you objectively accomplish that goal because you have, in fact, increased the opportunities for public participation. Second, and this is a practical issue, some people may not be able to make the meeting in time to participate in public expression at the beginning of the meeting. I know if I were not on the board, chances are I would probably still be at work and unable to make the first round. But if there was a later round, I could express myself, and I think that stands true for other people in the community. Third, someone may not know that they want to express themselves until they've heard what takes place at a board meeting. And lastly, by having a second round of public expression, there's no harm to the board or its operation or the function of the meeting, and there's a benefit to open government and public participation. So those are my 4 kind of categorical comments on that issue, and I think it's common sense, in my view, to add a second round of public participation.
Okay, thank you. I open it up to comments, questions from the board. Mrs. Leatherbarrow.
I guess that's more of a question. How would we estimate the time for the end of the meeting, if that's when you wanted to put it? Because typically I notice that we don't stay on our estimated times.
Well, there's truth to that. I think it would be difficult to pinpoint the exact time at which public expression, the second round, would come up. Just kind of off the top of my head, and again, this is for discussion tonight, but I would kind of view it as falling either before or after committee of the whole on our agenda. So again, you couldn't pinpoint the time, but I think if you had, let's say, if you were to have a second executive session during the meeting, if you at least held that after the second round of public expression, people could come up with a general idea of when they would have that opportunity. And it was another part of your question as to how much time each person would be allowed? Did I understand?
No, I think you answered that question. I do have a second question I just thought of. Is this request coming from a need that you've seen from anyone in the community? Because typically what I notice is by the end of the meeting, there's nobody here.
I think that's true, but we've also never had an opportunity for people to express themselves at the end of a meeting. And if they had that opportunity, you might see that more people stay or at least show up at the end of a meeting. So it's difficult to say what would happen. But offering the opportunity, again, comes at no cost to the board or its smooth operation.
Mr. Mecca.
I generally like the idea, and I wonder if we would be able to initiate it on a trial basis for a few meetings to see how it proceeds. And maybe there's no need for it, and we would find that out through doing the trial, or maybe there's a great need for it, and then we would find that out as well through the trial. But I like the points you bring up, and I think it makes some sense.
Thank you. Speaker?
I don't disagree with giving as many opportunities as possible for public expression. I think it's important for people to be heard. One of the things that I think may be a benefit of having one versus two is that that's the public expression time that I think everyone who feels the need to speak comes, and they're more likely to hear each other's points, and many times towards the end there's people who maybe weren't planning on speaking but then are compelled to speak after hearing other people. I wonder if we had two, if that would almost split up that I guess time for people to hear each other's points in public expression. I don't know. I'm not really opposed to it, but I do think there's a benefit of having it all at one time so that those who come to speak can hear each other's points.
Thank you. Anybody else? Dr. Van Hader.
Sure. Phil, I think you raised 4 excellent points. I'd be in support of it. I think the concept of providing more opportunity for community feedback in the spirit of always wanting to increase transparency is a great idea. And I think putting it in place, letting it see how it goes, really provides a nice opportunity and really doesn't extend the board or community involvement in a bad time frame at all. So I like the idea.
Thank you. Any other board members?
Yes, if I could just respond to a couple issues raised.
Go ahead.
One being trial period, and the second one, Mary, I don't know if I'm restating it correctly, but your concern was people wouldn't collectively appear in the beginning for public expression. Was that your concern if we had a second one?
I guess it was if it seems like the majority of people are usually here in the beginning of the meeting, and those who make their public expression do so at this time, and the majority of the congregation hears that point. Mm-hmm. Who am I to say when is the best time to express your opinion? But I guess just that was my thought of having the one time. That's when everyone would come and everyone would hear at the same time. I don't want to deny people the opportunity to come and share their thoughts with us. That was just my train of thought of having one versus two, that the benefit of everyone really hearing points being made at the microphone.
Okay. I guess I can understand that and see where you're coming from that perspective. However, I guess my personal opinion is that it wouldn't change. I think the vast majority of people show up at the beginning of the meeting to speak because that's probably the time that's most convenient for them. I guess once you institute, if we instituted a second round, we'd see in fact how things are impacted. But again, I think the second round actually just opens up more opportunity for people to express themselves. and then just kind of a practical concern with implementing it on a trial period is, and I may be wrong, but I believe we have a formal policy, and that public expression is written into that formal policy. So if you were to change it, I think you would need to formally change it. I don't know that we could do it on a trial basis. But I think that's something in follow-up to this discussion that we'd have to clarify.
Any other questions, comments? Mr. Mecca?
I guess my comment is question is, where do we go from here?
Well, let me dive in here. I wanted to reserve and wait for everybody else to formulate opinion here. Trial basis could be something to be considered. That might be something we want to consider. It is policy 1510, and I pulled it up here. I did not read it over fully here, but I'm skimming it real quick, and I don't see anything mentioning here that would prohibit us from doing a second public expression. However, that being said, I do agree, I think, with some of the comments that have been made here that watching time restrictions and stuff like that, I mean, the policy does state that we'll limit to a total of 30 minutes unless rules are suspended by a vote by the board. I don't know that we need to reserve 30 minutes for public expression at the end of a meeting. So we might want to consider, amending this policy if we do something moving forward. I think if we were to do a trial, I think this policy would be sufficient for at least a temporary basis. Again, I'm hoping that we're not going to have people speaking for 30 minutes or an hour at the end of our board meetings. But, and the question there too is do we want to make that like a 15-minute policy? Do we limit them commenting? Do we stay at 3 minutes? Do we knock it down to 1.5 minutes? Something like these are just things to be out there for the question. To Mr. Mecca's question here, I think this is marked as a discussion item for tonight, so we're just kind of verbalizing it. If it's something that we wanted to proceed on, I guess we would bring it up as an action and vote on it next month. So that would be something for the board members here to kind of informally agree and say, yep, we'd like to consider it. Mrs. Speaker?
I think as far as our policy, that it really doesn't limit us from doing this. The policy just states that it's 30 minutes, and if we reach 30 minutes, then we can vote, and if everyone agrees to continue public expression, we can. So, if public expression goes for 20 minutes in the beginning and we did have a second session and it went 10 minutes, we could always vote to extend it. I don't know if it's necessary to rewrite a policy in order to do this, but I suppose it's a good idea to check.
That's an interesting point, Mrs. Speaker. You're right. Per the policy, it says the public expression period, and it's talking in singular, shall be limited to a total of 30 minutes unless the rules are suspended by a vote of the board. I guess that's probably where we might amend the policy and change it and say 30 minutes at the beginning of the meeting, 15 minutes at the end, or something like that, because oftentimes I think we do push our 30-minute limit, certainly 20 minutes, unlike tonight, but Mr. Mecca.
Yes, if we're going to do it as a trial period, I would recommend not amending the policy. I'm looking at it here, and of course, just skimming it as you did briefly. The only limit that this would place on the second public expression is that probably the two combined would not exceed 30 minutes. But I think since we would be doing it as a trial, we would probably agree to extend it if we had 28 minutes of public expression during the first round and we only had 2 minutes left and 3 speakers. I'm pretty sure that given it's a trial for us, we're not going to cut our public expression short at that time.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Meyer?
Well, I guess I'd say, one, I have no objection to a trial period if that's what the majority is in favor of, although I'll state that I personally would be in favor of making it a permanent change, because I don't view that I'll learn anything negative about having increased public participation.
Dr. Martzloff.
I just want to point out, first of all, I support this idea. I think it's a nice way to try to increase communication from community members. In addition, in terms of it being a trial run, I think to Mr. Meyer's point, if you had a second public expression built into the agenda, and no one came and spoke during that time for, let's just say, an entire calendar year, what are you really losing out on? You're just going to skip over it and keep going with the agenda. So I don't really know what there would be to be gained by then backing it out and removing it. So maybe it makes sense, if you're going to do it, to put it in. We can look at our policies between now and the next meeting to see if there's anything that formally needs to be adjusted in the policy, and look at formally changing the agenda structure in a way that makes sense for the second public expression, which I would think would probably come after committee of the whole, but before any other executive sessions or things like that. So, and we'd make sure we'd be consistent from that end, if that makes sense to the board.
Mrs. Seraphin, do you have an opinion on it? You kind of put the agendas together, and you kind of are our backbone in making sure these meetings run fluently.
I don't see any negative points to it. I think
Okay.
that it's a great idea, and if somebody's here, like tonight, there's nobody here at the first one. There may not be anybody for the second, but there is that person. You've extended the opportunity. I don't see anything negative about doing it.
Okay. Any other comments on this?
Just for, I'm sorry, Teresa. Teresa raised her hand. I'll let her go first.
What?
Okay. I guess just for clarity, one, I'd say that I agree with the superintendent in terms of the process moving forward. And for clarity's purpose, is that in fact what we're doing? Because I'm on board with that.
Well, for clarity's purposes, we'll vote on it next month. Assuming that everybody here is in agreement, do we want to just propose it as a formal change or as a trial? It sounds certainly more of a formal change, and we'll just kind of keep it that way, and if need be, that we can revert it out at a future time. Yeah, Dr. McClary?
I was going to say, I think you have to go back and do a little bit of research to make sure, yes, we may all be in agreement, and then all of a sudden the staff will say, oh, but paragraph 2 says
Right.
can't do this and that.
Right. That's why I'm suggesting we can't vote on it tonight. We'll vote on it next month, and then that way, if there are issues or concerns, they'll be brought to our attention by then. We'll make sure that we're within the guidelines, or perhaps we do an amendment to policy 1510. So, any other comments? Mrs. Leatherborough?
I was just going to point out that if it is a policy change, it would still require 2 readings, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then also just the point, because I know there was just a comment from the audience, but it still doesn't change the fact that this is a meeting held in public and not a public meeting.
Correct.
But I think it sounds great.
And I think you're correct on the 2 readings of the policy, and I'd already thought of that. I think, again, how the policy is currently written is 30 minutes unless rules are suspended. For the first 2 months that we enact this new policy, if we do, we vote on it next month, we'll basically, we'll get by with the 30 minutes, and if we have to, we'll vote for an extension. Mr. Mecca?
On the current policy, it does call for the reading of that statement because it says at the beginning of each public expression period, and we would have 2, the board president shall indicate that the members of the board will listen to the remarks of the speakers and not reply or to engage, which, by the way, we violate our policy apparently every time we have a meeting, since the board president doesn't state that, but our parliamentarian states that. But anyway, that aside, it does seem that it calls for in the policy to read that statement before each public expression.
And I would agree with that. I don't think we should not read it on the second public expression because, again, you don't know that people are present when we read the first one.
But perhaps we want to change our policy to amend it so that the parliamentarian is the one that officially is reading that statement.
We can.
Since we've caught that error.
I will leave that in the hands of the district administrators and office personnel to take and figure out what's best, and they can present it to us. Any other questions or comments on this? If not, I'm going to move along, and we'll vote on this next month. Great, thank you. Let's see. Mrs. Van Sice last month asked us to revisit the topic of class rank elimination and discuss the possibility of expanding the elimination of class rank to the additional classes. I have asked Dr. Sierri and Dr. Ballant to review the reasons for the recommended phasing out of the class rank and to please give us a brief, quick reminder as to what those were.
Good evening, everyone. When we first contemplated the removal of class rank, it really was brought to our attention by students, faculty, administration, and we did indeed conduct a survey, received parental responses, minimal faculty responses, and some student responses. The research we then subsequently conducted indicated to us that class rank was going by the wayside in terms of use by colleges and universities. It wasn't as popular as it had been in years past. That what universities currently do, or institutions of higher education currently do, is really take a whole student perspective and assessment of what the student has availed themselves of in the educational community that, or the school that they currently attend. It was part of the reason why it was so important for us to take a look at our school profiles and update those a couple years ago to make sure they were consistent across all 3 high schools and that we clearly articulated what opportunities students had in our high school setting. In addition, it was shared with us that the differences amongst students in terms of their class rank was very, very minimal in terms of the statistical calculations, and that it caused some students a fair degree of stress or anxiety with regard to their class rank. So as a result, and there were several other issues that we have shared previously with the Board of Education. As a result, we undertook the adventure of, again, examining class rank as we had done many years ago. We did contact colleges and universities, and when I say we, I really have to give credit to all the individuals at our high schools who really took hold of that and made the calls. Our school counselors divided up the list, made direct calls. Dr. Balin and I made a few contacts as well to districts, nearby districts, that had eliminated class rank, and just to get a sense of what the potential effect, negative or positive, was in the elimination for them. And much of what we heard in our calls was positive. So having said that, we prepared a presentation, shared some information with the Board of Education. Our building principals also had conversations back at their respective buildings and made a proposal or recommendation to contemplate or consider eliminating class rank for entering students. Anything additional?
Could you guys give us a reminder, please, as to why we chose to phase it in over 3 years? I know in the original presentation in the spring, we were discussing that versus rolling it in immediately. Could you elaborate on that for us, please?
Thank you. Good evening. Part of this same group's discussion and also extensive conversation in the buildings was held just on that very topic. Considering there were multiple perspectives, some did feel that a more immediate and a wider net of students being included and not having rank certainly would be supportive, but we did have quite a few stakeholders also indicate that perhaps those who are already considered to be in the pipeline or already have been preparing for rank to be part of their high school experience, it would just be as important for us to consider that we do have a number of students and parents who already had gone into the high school setting expecting this to be part of their experience. So there was actually quite a bit of discussion around when to start and what audience it would be and how wide that net would be cast. And knowing that it would be a pretty substantive change for our school community, and knowing that we've had class rank for a long, long time, the option favoring a more incremental approach and not the wider net was the preferable option based on the feedback that we received.
Is this one of those instances where you would say it'd be fair to say that we're protecting the minority versus the majority in this case, because the class rank really only affects a small percentage of each class set? However, they've only got they've got a very minor, not so vocal voice because of that. So the decision is one of those that we're looking at really protecting them, since they've made an effort to make a career, to make these positionings for their class rank, make that a career move that for the last 3 years that we're trying to look out for them in these cases.
That's a leading question.
I think it would be.
No, that is. If I was on the stand here, I'd be
Yeah, you're like,
I'm leading the witness.
problem. I think it would be difficult for me to characterize it as a minority because I could not, in good faith, quantify how many people
Right.
would be comprising that group that I just spoke of. However, we do know that there are voices within our school community who shared with us that they had a different perspective, and if we were going to move to eliminate, we did want to take into account that we have a varied stakeholder group and varied opinions. With that being said, and also again knowing the scope of the change that we were seeking and really pursuing relative to the recommendations to eliminate, that's a very large scale change, and wanting to do it with clear communication and clarity, and really to answer any questions that any one of our school community members would have. So it was really an effort to be very deliberate and thoughtful with regard to the perspectives of the members of our school community and our students.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Van Cise.
So I felt that we really needed to bring this up again. I don't think at this point, some people of course have differing opinions. A majority of people have expressed that they are very happy with seeing the elimination of class rank. So I don't think that's in question at all. That's not why I asked for it to be here tonight. The one thing I felt was important is for, I believe, the past 3 board meetings, we've had a parent and or student come to the podium and speak to us about this. Primarily the sophomore class, including a student who had a petition with over 400 student names from just one school. Now I thought, and I don't want to overstep my boundaries, but potentially going to the other 2 schools to see what other students are sophomores out there. So it was explained to us that the class of 2021 would be the class to be implemented with elimination of class rank, because the Band-Aid, we don't want to rip off the Band-Aid. I understand we want to protect maybe the junior and the senior class. But with all the research that was delivered to the community, the point is that class rank is no longer necessary. It could potentially be a disservice to many students. It creates too much anxiety, as well as too much competitiveness amongst classmates. The sophomore class currently is not vested yet into class rank. They do not have a class rank yet. I mean, at this point in time, they don't know it. So therefore, if we have all this research and this information saying that eliminating class rank is beneficial, I'm simply, and yes, I am a parent of a sophomore student, but parents and students have spoken out. And so I really believe it's our due diligence to listen and to at least bring it back up for discussion about potentially having this be implemented for the class of 2020.
I agree with you in your comments. This is our responsibility as board members, is to bring these things up, and especially the community has made some comments on this, especially the community forum again. I've heard from parents on juniors and seniors looking to eliminate it too, though. So, and that's becomes this gray area. And my apologies to leading the witness over here. But what I was trying to get at with asking that question is if we have a class size of, say, 300 students, and class rank really only affects maybe 20 of them, roughly, that have really, or maybe even 10, 15 of them, is it fair for us, for that minority, to eliminate it if they've worked their behinds off for the last year, 2 years, 3 years to get to that place? Mrs. Speaker.
I think actually quite the opposite of class rank affecting only 10 or 20 of them. I think that a lot of our students are really high performing, and that's an opportunity that maybe someone who scores in the top 20, there may be a student who is like just as close, you know, by a percentage that's 32 that can't apply for that scholarship because we're in such a high performing district. That was one of the strongest points that I heard from parents, is that some of them felt like their child was denied a scholarship because of class rank, that it's holding some of our kids back. Seeing that student come with a petition of over 400 kids made me think, this is a pretty serious issue. If that many kids are willing to write their name on a piece of paper, I think it's worth revisiting as well. And in my mind, it's not even just, well, the top 10, it's all those other kids that are really working hard, and it's not just the number, it's the, you know, the weight of their classes and their performance throughout their high school career. So I think it really impacts a lot of our high school kids. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Mrs. Leatherborough.
I have a question, actually. I know there was recently an inter-high advisory council, and I remember reading the liaison report for that. Was there any discussion regarding class rank at this most recent inter-high meeting?
No, it was a topic of conversation last year amongst Inter-High Advisory Council, and the pretty much all of the students from each of our 3 high schools who take part in that council expressed an interest in not having class rank anymore.
I'm sorry. Is there an opportunity during that meeting for them to raise new issues, or is there?
The agenda is pretty structured for our conversations. If it's something the board's interested in hearing more about, I can certainly bring it up at a future Superintendent's Inter-High Advisory Council. It's not a problem at all.
I'm asking these questions because I'm pretty split on this issue. I also have a freshman and a junior, so I have children that are operating essentially under different systems right now. I felt at the time that we as a board made the right decision. To my knowledge, there was no other district in the area that had quite taken this on, and I'd be curious to know if another district has since followed in our footsteps, but I was proud of our decision as a board. I feel that before I could make a vote or cast a vote to possibly expand it, I would want to see a quick survey done to parents of 10th and 11th graders, not to students, but to parents, because I want to see just what they have to say. How did they feel as parents? And I'm interested to know if we have the capability of sending that out to just our sophomore and juniors families through its mail or whatever. It could be just a simple question. Do you want to see class rank expanded to the sophomore class and to the junior class? It could be 2 questions, yes or no. I think that is important to get the community and parent feedback.
Dr. Martzloff, do we not have class rank for sophomores? Is that correct? There is no such list?
No, we do have class rank that will impact sophomores, juniors, and seniors. I think Mrs. Van Sice's point was it hasn't been calculated yet for sophomores.
Okay. So we don't know. I would be interested, to overturn a vote or to change a vote, I think I would need more information and more overwhelming evidence to be able to change what we've already voted on. I think I would like to see information specifically from the students that would be affected directly. So maybe the top 50 students, the top 30 students of each class, because those are the ones that this really affects. It's not the entire class of 300 that are affected by this.
And I have to disagree with that. That's really not the...
We're here to protect them, though. So
no, we're not. That's actually almost segregating a class. It is a full class. It is a full issue of class ranking amongst a class. You can't say you only want the top 30. That's skewed information right there to begin with. That is class ranking within trying to take a survey. So you would not want to do that. And I'm not sure we're trying to, if we would need to change exactly how we voted. Elimination of class rank is not the topic. We want that. We're just talking about expanding. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's this massive issue. I think having a parent voice, maybe the student voice, a quick survey is definitely an idea, a very smart one, to help us with this substantial issue, because we want to do the right thing, and best practice for the students. But I don't think surveying just the top 20 is how you would ever want to go about this. It needs to be for all parents.
Dr. Van
I have two thoughts to share. The first is I think we have to be very careful with our phrasing about minority or majority of students. In that, I would echo your points, Susan, that this affects all students, given the fact that they're all given a class rank. So I think we need to be cautious in how we phrase that. From a second standpoint, second thought, to me it was very clear. I don't think anyone is in favor of changing the rules of a game once the game starts. I think we made a very thoughtful and calculated decision as a board to institute this with incoming freshmen before they started class rank, before they were making long-term decisions on courses, AP classes, etc. I think if you consider sophomore students, my son included at East, his coursework in part was determined by the fact that he was going to be factored into class rank, as a number of his colleagues at East are taking multiple APs for that reason. And I think if we make that sweeping change, we are in effect changing the rules of the game in the middle of the game. And for me, that was the salient point that at least resonated with me when the decision was made.
Thank you for taking my words and making them make more sense. Any other comments, questions?
Yeah, I would echo what Mr. Venator said. In fact, in my notes right here, I have changed the rules of the game written down, so good words. But to me, it's a question. Obviously, these were all very good points which led me to the conclusion that we should eliminate class rank. But then the question became one of implementation and responsible implementation. And in my view, the phased-in approach we took was responsible implementation, because each class of students has expectations when they come in. And many of the students came in expecting class rank to be a part of what they had to prepare for. They did prepare for it. They put in effort. And it would be, to me, akin to changing the rules of the game at halftime. And what I picture in my head when we talk about changing it so that it affects everyone, across the board, is we're telling, one or more kids, hey, I know you've put in all this effort 4 years. I know you put a lot of planning into what you've done, but guess what? The Board of Education just decided to take it away from you because we know better than you and your parents and everything that you decided to do given what the rules of the game were. And so I don't feel comfortable that the board should put itself in that kind of position. I think the way that we've done it is responsible. That said, I certainly understand and can appreciate, the opinions of everybody else saying, no, we should do it across the board right now. I get it. I just happen to disagree with that.
Mrs. Beeger?
I think ultimately as a board we should be pretty responsive to community input. And I like the idea of really appealing to parents in sophomore class, of the sophomore class, junior class, and possibly students as well. If we're going to continue this conversation or think about expanding, I mean, I have my own opinions on it, but I'm really curious if they feel like it's changing the rules in the middle of the game, or if they feel like, how could you leave my kid out? And I just don't know. I mean, I've had conversations with some parents and, heard opinions as an entire district, all of the parents of all three schools, and we heard pretty loud from the students at East High School, but we haven't heard from the others. I would be interested, and I don't know if that's a possibility, but really surveying those particular subgroups to see if this is something that's overwhelmingly a desire of the parents and students, or if it's kind of a split opinion.
Mrs. Van Cise, do you have an opinion?
You must have missed it.
On that note.
I understand, but sometimes, see, the way I look at it is when I hear changing the rules of the game, to me as an educator, I think of it, we have to have a growth mindset. So with that, I always go back to student voice and parent voice. And we made a decision. We were given information. But I do believe in what we heard, especially from that WITS chain that went on through email. Many people didn't really tune into it until after the fact. Not to say that we want to go back and change. I just keep going back to, you know, if we're saying that this is in the best interest to eliminate class rank, it needs to be, and again, we're talking about two different levels. I mean, some people have plans since, I guess, freshman year, some people haven't. So I would like to actually see some parent voice just for input. And then it would just be a further discussion. We might not do anything with it, but actually listening and just taking this into consideration so we have some sound, you know, and we did even further fact-finding because it was presented to us again.
I'd like to get Dr. Martzloff's opinion on this, but before I do that, I want to give the opportunity for anybody who has not spoken yet. Mrs. Vasquez or Dr. McClary or anybody else? Any opinions?
I'm in favor of eliminating class rank immediately.
No comments, though? No? Okay, thank you. Mr. Mecca?
I'm the polar opposite of Mrs. Vasquez. I feel like we should probably keep it the way we just decided to do it.
Okay. Dr. McClary?
I would just, again, add the time factor that our original discussion is about, well, the sophomores aren't really vested in it yet because they've just begun, only begun. But it's momentarily, it's going to be January. And so by the time we do the survey, which a survey is a good idea, but by the time you do the survey and discuss it and so forth and so on, then it's going to be March. And then can we say, all right, we've done all this work and we've decided to eliminate it for sophomores, but it's already March, so we can't for those sophomores. So I just want us to be mindful of the time factor.
And to Dr. Venator's rewording of my point, we're going to be, in January, the students will pick their classes for their next year, which now puts us back on to, you're right, Dr. McClary, that it would be March, April, potentially before any changes would occur. They've already picked their junior year classes sets at that point to further on that academic achievement. So that does definitely bring up a yellow flag. Dr. Venator?
You know, I'd like to bring up another point. I think we'd be remiss and not honest with ourselves if we didn't recognize that starting in middle school, students are already choosing classes that will set them up for an accelerated track if they so choose in high school. I mean, looking at my son who went to transit, he was taking certain classes knowing that he would be on a certain track once he got to high school so that he could take AP biology. So I don't fully agree with the statement that it does not have effect. In fact, I disagree with the statement that it doesn't have an effect on sophomore students. I think for us, again, I look at students and parents that looked forward in a calculated fashion for the education development of their children and made decisions probably starting in 7th grade, possibly 8th grade, definitely, and 9th grade. So I think, again, I come back to changing the rules in the middle of the game. I think the decision was made to abolish class rank, and I think we were dutiful and fair. The second thought I'd raise is, you know, I am, as you know, all about community involvement, transparency, and feedback. I want to survey everyone as much as we can. My question to you would be, if we do survey sophomore parents and children and students in the district, do we go with just a majority? Do you, I mean, how does that, and to me, I think as a board, we need to be upholding ourselves to clarity in a thoughtful, rational way when we make decisions. Mm-hmm. Not everything can be about a majority. We made these decisions as a school district based upon a survey, based upon a tremendous amount of research and work done by the district, based on reaching out to university and academic institutions, and that helped inform that decision. I think now, going back and simply surveying parents and students around this could lead us on a slippery slope. If 80% come back and say, no, we want to abolish, well, what about the 20%? And I think we just need to be conscious of that.
I think your elegantly put words really reinforce what my point was that I was trying to make before, with saying, you know, let's survey just the students that are in that top 30 or something. I didn't mean it to come across as segregating or anything like that, but that was where I was leading with it, in thinking this is not one of those that the majority rules. In my opinion, I don't believe this is one of those instances that the majority rules is what we need to be listening to. We need to be listening to the minority in this case that have put that effort together, as you've suggested, starting possibly back as far as middle school. If there's no other comments, I would like to get Dr. Martzloff's opinion on this.
Just one other comment.
Yes, please.
Mr. LeMay.
Please.
Just in reference to what Dr. Venator said, I don't think that children take AP courses or take advanced courses just for class rank. And I don't want us at the table to think that that's the only reason why students want to take these accelerated classes. I think that's probably one of the very, it's not a very important reason why they would want to take advanced classes. I know I have 3 kids that graduate from the district already. They wanted to take, not all of them, granted, but a couple of them wanted to take advanced classes because of college, because they wanted to do better in their college courses, not because of class rank. So I don't want to confuse these issues that it's only because of class rank.
Before you do, I do want to counter that just real quick, and I apologize. A friend of mine's son was class valedictorian at a school here, and starting in middle school, that was his drive. He wanted to be #1 in his class when he graduated. He wanted to be the absolute top position, so he made sure he took the classes to get to that position. So there are students that do academically put together their mindset to go after that goal. Mrs. Beeger.
I just want to agree with what Mrs. Vasquez says, and one of the things that we found that was presented to us is that colleges aren't just looking at rank, they're looking at the transcript. So for students that start in 7th grade and are on that accelerated track and they're taking extra courses in the summer, that doesn't take away from their transcript. All those courses are there, all that knowledge is there, the AP credits they have, the weight that carries, that doesn't go away. What it does, I think, is just level the playing field. So all the kids who are going through those motions, because we have a ton of kids going through those motions. I mean, we had that presentation in summer school, and half of our high school children are not there for remediation. They are there to better themselves. So, or I shouldn't say better themselves. They're there to better their transcript, I guess we'll say, right? And I would think that benefit of that work they did, that's showing up on their transcript, that's showing up when they're applying. So I think taking away class rank doesn't take away the efforts of those children who are on an advanced track.
And I would agree, for just to be true to the record, I would agree with both your comments. Not everyone taking AP courses does it purely for class rank, and I recognize that. However, we made a decision midstream, mid-game, and we have to recognize that while what you just shared I agree with, may have not been within the decision tree of parents and students as they made their selections over the course of a number of years. And for me, it's not necessarily arguing with, should we abolish class rank, should we not? It is, we've made a decision to do it. Let's be fair to all the constituents, not just the 10%, 30%, but let's be fair, because we don't know what were the driving factors within the decision tree of all these different constituents.
Mrs. Leatherborough.
I realize this conversation's gone on for a while, but I just want to actually thank the student that brought the petition to us to the board meeting. Was it last month?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because I think the amount of time that we've spent on this discussion should be testament that this board is very thoughtful in their decision making. And many of us here have children or grandchildren in the district, or have children that will be entering the district shortly. So I think it's just, to me, it's very comforting to know that even when someday when I'm not a board member, that our children are going to be in good hands, because we've got board members who truly care about the decision-making process. We've really exhausted this issue, but it's also a testament to the student that brought it as a petition to show that advocacy can happen at any age. And all these students sitting in the audience getting their participation in government credit here, please know that when you bring an issue to the board, it really does get heard, and we really do take it seriously.
Dr. Martzloff, please, your opinion.
Well, Mrs. Leatherbarrow stole some of my comments. But I do think if you look at the genesis of tonight's conversation, it's really about hearing from parents and from students who felt appreciative of, for the most part, for the board's decision in September to eliminate class rank for all students starting with this year's incoming freshmen, but then questioned, well, why not 10th, 11th, and 12th grade students? And I think the critical piece is less about the decision that the board makes and more about having that conversation and having that discussion and saying, yeah, I see these points. I see what this group of students was saying. I see what parents were saying at the PTSA meeting, at one of our recent meetings. That's the critical piece, to have the discussion, to have the debate, to have, because everyone's making great points all around the board table tonight. But I think it would make sense to look at asking our community again of 10th, 11th, and 12th grade students, or even 10th and 11th for that matter, to say, what do you think? Should we consider eliminating it for 10th grade students, 11th grade students? Put in a little section for comments so people can give their narrative, which many of them did when they replied all to my Wits mail about a month ago, so that we can get that feedback, share it with the board. Maybe we have one more debate at the February board meeting about this topic, but then we've heard everybody in every way we possibly can. I can also speak to the SIAC students, get their input one more time, and share it with the board at the board table and come together and talk about it. If we don't change it, then fine. If we do change it, that's fine too. But there'll be a rationale, there'll be reasons for it. And to Dr. Venator's point, 80% say get rid of class rank for 10th and 11th graders. I don't think the board should automatically jump. Maybe there's a phrase in the survey that said, this is for advisory purposes only. It's not making the decision in place of the school board. It's so the school board can get a flavor, if you will, for what parents are thinking. So that's my thinking. Dr. Sierra, or Dr. Balin, anything to add?
I would support surveying and getting the input. I think there's a way we can craft the survey to get a sense of what our students and our parents would like to see happen, so to further inform the board's decisioning. And I certainly can also ask the Wellness Council members when we meet at our next Wellness Council meeting.
I concur as well and fully support any outreach and feedback we can get from our stakeholders, namely our parents and our students. Thank you.
Well, this was a very healthy discussion. I appreciate all points of view on this, and I thank you. It's a great board that we can sit here and debate and disagree and yet still walk away and be happy with our decisions and thought process here. I like Dr. Martzloff's suggestion here on that, and some of my other colleagues here. So is it fair to say that we should try and initiate a survey of the community, the parents and students, as a advisory purpose to get their opinions on this, and then we can come back and have another discussion at a future board meeting regarding this? I see a bunch of head nods, so okay. Thank you. Moving on. Yep, Dr. Martzloff, would you like to give me your community update, please?
Just briefly, thank you, Mr. LeMay. Again, want to thank all of our community members who came to our community forum and shared their ideas and took part in the discussion for several hours recently on a Saturday in November. In addition, I wanted to let the board and the community know we've been talking about an open-ended parent survey for our parents. We aim to send that out via WITS in early January once the December break is concluded. And there'll be a piece to that where people actually get to go in and look at different responses and sort of weigh what they think is most important. So it's something new, something different, a different way of engaging with folks, but we think it will yield some positive results. In addition, as a result of the conversation at the community forum, in regards to foreign language instruction. We thought it would be important in February into March sometime to do a community survey about foreign language instruction. We did one in 2009, I believe, and 2013 as well. So we think it's about time to do that again and report back to the board. We've had discussions at the leadership team level about what would be best in terms of if we were to offer another foreign language. Would we make it an elective at the high school level? Would we start it in kindergarten for elementary students? Would we begin it in middle school at some point in time? And we're still having some discussions about that, looking at best practice, looking at the research. And so we'll have more information for the board in the springtime about this particular possibility and the survey results. So that concludes my community update. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Would someone like to take the revised policies and make a motion to bring them back from being tabled last month? Mrs. Beeger, second. Mrs. Van Cise, thank you. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 8-0. Would someone like to move the second reading and adoption of the following revised policies? 5650, smoking tobacco use. 7320, alcohol, tobacco, drugs, and other substances. 7520, accidents and medical emergencies. 7670, due process complaints, selection of board appointment of impartial hearing officers. Mrs. Beeger, second. Mrs. Van Cise, is there any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 8-0. Dr. Martzloff, would you like to begin the staffing and class size report for 2017-2018, please?
Sure. Each year in November, the Board of Education receives an enrollment report that's conducted by the Red Group out of Syracuse, New York, that looks at all of our enrollment at various schools across the district and tries to make accurate predictions for the future, in particular over the next 5 years. So this year we have an enrollment report, and if you look at in November, and then that translates to a class size report. And the reason for the class size report is to look at which sections across the district are below Board of Education minimums and which ones are above Board of Education guidelines for maximums. So I'm going to ask Dr. McKenna, our Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources, to perhaps give just a very brief, quick summary of what this particular report shows at the elementary, middle, and high school level. Dr. McKenna?
Sure. What we do is we took the report from last month, too, from Syracuse, and we looked at those numbers as well and incorporated them into this report. And then what we do is we look into WITS. We do an analysis of all the classes. We actually go class by class across the district to really review each class and the specific numbers in each class. We do that at the elementary, middle, and high school level. After we compile a preliminary report based on WITS, then what we do is we talked about it in our leadership cabinet, but also we get it to the principals for review. They make sure they go through the numbers. They do make revisions and get them back to us. Then we cross-check the numbers that they get back to us as well to make sure they're accurate. And that's how we come with these final reports. It really comes from WITS and from the principals, and then a lot of actually looking at class sizes and going right to buildings and specifically seeing who's in classes. So this is as accurate as we could get. It changes, though, we've seen by the day. You'll see that there's a lot of movement, and so what we have to do is sometimes just got to just pick a date and time. And so that's what we did, and when we cross-checked, this is the accurate numbers that we could see. And when you take a look at the class size report, I could say from looking at it, I'd say that with the overwhelming within our guidelines and many below, I think it really shows that the class sizes in Williamsville are clearly in the best interest of students. I give the district a lot of credit. This is the first time I've gone through this report and done this exercise, and I can say that it is very clear that the Board of Education and the principals and the central office staff have done a yeoman's task of making sure that class sizes and classes are structured in ways that children get the best benefit from it. I can tell you that.
Any questions from the board about the report?
Mrs. Leatherbrow?
I'm noticing that at the middle schools, home and career seems to be the class that has sections under 25. Are any changes in the works for that, or is that, I'm thinking just logically, that's probably a safety issue too, because if you're cooking and dealing with open flames and sewing machines and all that fun stuff, it's probably safer to do that.
I agree with you. And if you noticed, we looked at last year's report, and we noticed that Home and Careers was not on there. So I made sure it got on there this year, because I thought it was important to have it on. And that was one of the reasons that they felt that that's one of the classes that they like to keep lower for student safety. But most of those classes too, when you looked at the breakdown of all of them, many were very close to the guidelines as well.
I see some classes at the high school level, a few at East. It seems a majority of them are at South, and a few at North that are well under the minimum 15 requirement. And I even highlighted some of these, and I see a lot of these classes that are sitting at like 3, 5, 3, 6, 8, 5. And some of these classes are like AP Studio Art, AP Portfolio, the Turbulent 60s, AP Music Theory, Spanish 5A, and I'm just randomly grabbing some of them here. That's not all of them. So, but is it economically feasible for us to fund classes with this low of a turnout? I mean, are these, let me back that up before you answer that. Are these classes offered once a year, twice a year? Are they offered every other year? Is there a way that we could look at, if these are offered every year, that we can increase the class sizes by maybe offering them every other year or something along those guidelines?
Sure.
So we can boost them?
What I could do is I could work with the principals, and if you wanted to, I could identify classes, for example, that were 10 or under, and see if we could do a special analysis of those classes to see if there's a way that we can increase the enrollment in those classes. I know some of them were 6th assignment, like when you mentioned the Turbulent 60s, because I questioned that class myself, because I wondered, hey, that sounds like a pretty interesting class. And they said that was a 6th assignment that one of the teachers had put together just to see how it would work. So that was an experimental class, I know, this year, and as a 6th assignment.
Okay. I would be interested. I don't know if my colleagues here are, but I know we're looking at, sadly, the state funding probably not coming through to levels that we would like, and you know, we're looking at projections that we're going to have a report on here shortly, and I'm always sadly having to look at those tough decisions sometimes, that are these feasibly economical for us to continue, and are there ways that we can either increase our enrollments or make them economically feasible to the district, like potentially offering it every other year or something like that. But I'm open to ideas and suggestions, and the impact financially on these may not even be of that significant worth, so I might be asking for info that really doesn't materialize too much in the budget.
What I think is very reasonable is for the classes that, let's say, are under 10 or less, I could very easily talk with the principals and get a breakdown of those classes, find out if there's any plan they have to increase enrollment, or if they were a special, maybe 6th assignment like that one class is at this time. I could try to get more specific information regarding those classes.
Yeah, you hit it on the head. My magic number was 10 too. I was highlighting anything 10 or under here. So, Dr. McClure?
Could you also go back a little bit historically in some of those classes? For example, just because we use the same examples about like studio and art, you know, there's 3 people in it. Is there 3 people every single year, or last year were there 20 and this year there only happened to be 3? So if it could be a couple of years to
Sure.
get a better sense of that number too.
Sure, that's no problem.
I think that information would be in the board packet and the board information, the minutes from the last however many December meetings you want to go back, that's available. We can get that pretty easily if the board wants it. I think that's all going retrospectively, though. So you're looking at history. And one of the reasons why you see some of these smaller numbers for some of these very specific elective courses at the high school level is because about 6 years ago, when we were cutting the budget, we made a decision based on student input to, they said, please don't let those specific courses go away that connect individual students to school very, very well, that they're very interested in. If you're going to bump up class size, do it in English 12 or in participation in government and economics, other courses that perhaps are in a student's senior year that don't have a Regents exam at the end, that would prepare them better for college when they might have 300 students in an auditorium, for example, that they're in class with. So that was based on some of that feedback. The other thing I see going forward is every year we do staffing with our secondary principals in early March. So if the board is really interested in holding the line on staffing, let me know that, and I'm happy to have those conversations along with Dr. McKenna with the principals to say, if you're under 15, we're not running that class next year. And that's a tough decision to make, but at the same time, there's board guidelines. If we're over 20 students in a kindergarten class, you're going to hear about it at the podium.
Right.
It's the same thing with what if you're under the guidelines. That's could be a concern.
Mr. Mecca?
And that's why I like Dr. McKenna's take on the question that was asked. You turned it around very subtly and said, let's see if we can increase enrollment in those classes. That's kind of the opposite approach of it. And I think that the desire of not having those classes go away, the goal of meeting that desire is to increase the size of those classes. I think it was an excellent suggestion.
And I want to say, too, that these classes that usually have the low class sizes, when I've had the conversations with the principals, they really do feel strongly about these classes. They truly do. And they do see the benefit to the students. So I think that has to be the philosophy as we move forward. How can we increase enrollment? Because they do look like they're excellent for the kids. And I believe the principals, and I don't blame the principals for being protective of these classes that they know are beneficial to the students.
And I think that's got a good point. That's got its place, too, is that we want school to be fun.
Right.
So if some of these classes are bringing that entertainment and that fun value to some of the students, it certainly has some weight, some bearing. So,
I just thought of a question through this dialogue. Do our seniors have the option of only spending half the day at school? Are they able to do an early release? So I would be interested in knowing. I remember doing it as a senior, but some of them are doing it for employment and others are just doing it to go home. I would be interested in knowing what percentage of our seniors actually spend the whole day at school, because that might attribute to some of the enrollment in our elective courses here.
Yes, Mrs.
I don't mean to bring up our lengthy discussion earlier about class rank, but one of the things that stood out to me a couple presentations ago was a comment, I don't know if it was by a student or presented, the thought that sometimes students don't choose courses that they're interested in because they're trying to pursue class rank. So they may choose this path of these other courses, and maybe they don't take the journalism class because they can't fit it in, or they're really interested in anthropology, but they're following this track. So I'm interested to see, as we know certainly that our incoming freshmen don't have that class rank hanging over their heads, if they would have some freedom to pursue some classes that are more interesting to them, which ultimately might impact what they choose to do when they leave high school.
Mr. Mecca?
Teresa, that was pure brilliance on your part to think of that, I think, because that may account for some things. And I think that, Mary, your point to class rank has a lot of value with possibly what demand might, where demand might change in the future for courses. It leads me to think that possibly, if we get those numbers, then I think we should pursue the percentage of students that leave early and see what that number looks like in each of the schools. And if that number is fairly high, perhaps we can incentivize students in some way through some sort of designation at graduation or something, I don't know what, to stick around and take those courses as opposed to whatever else they're going to do.
Instead of leaving and going home early.
Right.
Right. Great feedback, great comments, great discussion. Any other comments or questions? Great, thank you. Dr. McKenna, please don't let the teachers or principals think that we're cutting these classes. We're just asking questions.
Yeah, I will not.
Moving on here. Dr. Martzloff, would you like to give your presentation on the staffing projections, please?
Sure. Again, this information is based on the enrollment report and is a extremely early snapshot of what staffing projections might look like at the elementary, middle, and high school level. If you recall, the last 2 Decembers at the elementary level alone, we were looking at, I believe, a -8 last year, and the year before a -12 in FTEs at the elementary level. And because through the budget process we made the decision to reduce class size the last couple of years, that was very helpful in being able to maintain positions and provide for a higher number of sections for our elementary program. So any questions on this report, happy to answer them at this time.
Thank you. Would someone like to make a motion to resolve to approve the academic intervention plan as presented? Anyone? Mrs. Beeger, thank you. Is there a second? Mrs. Van Cise, thank you. Any discussion? Mr. Mecca.
Sure. In looking this over, I noticed that there are clear paths to receiving AIS for academic issues, but there's also a whole behavioral component, and I wonder how are students chosen to participate in those intervention services that are listed in the report?
Dr. Martzloff?
I'll turn it over to Dr. Sierri, who will address that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Martzloff. Just like with the academic aspect of the AIS report, the same multidimensional, multifactorial process occurs for students in terms of receiving any type of behavioral intervention or support. So there may be attendance data that we're looking at because that may raise a concern. Obviously, the state has also indicated that's a metric that they would like school districts to look at because of the significant impact if students are not regularly participating in their academic program and benefiting from the rich academic instruction and conversation that occurs in the classroom. That might be one element. There may be another element with regard to disciplinary referrals, and that could range from all sorts of disciplinary referrals that would require some intervention on our part. We also have, thank you to the Board of Education, a full complement of school psychologists, school social workers, school counselors, and our school nurses who might see a concern with regard to how students are accessing their academic program. So there may be anxiety-based challenges that students face, and those of you that have been following that nationally know that there's an increase in the number of students that are struggling with anxiety at this particular moment in time. So there's a whole host of ways that we assess or identify if students need some additional supports. Beyond that, our teachers also will make referrals, and they are in regular communication with our school counselors and social workers and psychologists, as well as our administrators. And obviously, parents can also connect with us if they have a concern with regard to their child.
Can I follow up?
Sure, please.
Okay. So then those are also considered AIS services, like those that are struggling with attendance and receive some sort of intervention of that nature?
We build that into the plan.
Did I say attention? I meant attendance.
I know. Thank you for the clarification, but we build that into the plan because we want to recognize the whole child. So it's important to us not to just focus on academic indicators, but all other indicators that may warrant that a student may need some support. A student does not have to be classified, for example, by the Committee on Special Education to receive supports and intervention from any one of our professional staff members. And that is the reason why we felt it important to include that component in the AIS plan.
Thank you.
Any others? Yep, Mrs. Speaker.
So I thought this was a very comprehensive plan, and there's really a wide variety of description of services, the support services, the providers, which I like because that shows that there's a range of support given the student need. So I have two questions, and my first is looking at the assessment instrument or entry information for, let's say, a fifth grader that's maybe struggling in math. One of the assessment instruments is the fourth grade New York State test, but then there's also an indicator that it seems like there's some other work and other criteria considered. So if that, say, that fifth grader refused the test or didn't take a state test and they don't have that score, what construct does our district have in place to ensure that that child would still get support if needed?
Well, thank you, first of all, for the compliment. A lot of feedback from our stakeholders at the building level and parent input really went into crafting what we believe is a very comprehensive plan. What I would first and foremost say, students without state testing results are neither included automatically or excluded. Just like the comments that Dr. Siri made about the behavioral aspect, we seek to consider any information we have at our disposal about students. Using fifth grade as an example, we have various data points, which I would also say are both qualitative and quantitative. I think we remember back to the days not so long ago where New York State really predicated, it was almost an if-then statement. If you have this score, then this is what you got, which we take, fortunately, a much different approach now. It is a multiple measures approach. With that being said, we have items like benchmark assessments, we have teacher recommendations, parental input, which we do get and welcome as part of this process. We have the math lab that was spoken to a few board meetings ago, give us day-to-day information on how students are doing. So it's just as much important for us to look at a student over time and not seeing it as a sentence of you are either in or out, because with any given need that presents itself, any concern, we want to be poised to be able to provide support to students based on their need, which means it's a very fluid process. Teams function at the school level to look at individual students and what is best in terms of that delivery of service, the frequency, and really close monitoring that goes into that as well. So I feel like a very comprehensive, thorough approach is used, and also a just-in-time approach. So what we don't want to happen is many weeks or months pass where students experience a challenge and it goes unmet. So with that being said, I think we have a very thorough process in place.
Nice follow-up. Sure. I'm so glad that our district uses multiple measures in this way and that we're not just entering and exiting kids based on one score. My second question was going to be how then our service is determined, and you explained that very well, that we've got teams of people working together to look at the information. So I applaud our district for really thinking that through and making decisions, and also including teacher and parent information. That's helpful too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? I too want to thank you guys for that. I especially being a parent that's had children opt out and stuff like that, I appreciate that we don't look just at a test score, that we're looking at everything. So thank you. Would someone like to make a motion to resolve to approve the academic intervention plan as presented tonight? Mrs. Van Cise, thank you. Second? Mr. Mecca, thank you. Any other discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Abstains? Motion carries unanimously. Dr. Martzloff, would you like to start with the 2018-2019 budget development presentation tonight, please?
Yes, this time I'll turn it over to Mr. Matursky, who has a PowerPoint presentation for the board. Mr. Matursky.
Thank you, Dr. Martzloff. The information today being presented is a brief summary on the written materials that are included in the board information tonight. They include the long-range financial plan as well as the long-range reserve plan. So just to begin, I'd like to review a couple of the key items regarding the long-range financial plan. And it really begins with a fact that it reviews the internal and external factors that impact our revenue and expense budget, not just for the current year that we're working on, which is 18-19, but for future years. Additionally, it looks at a 5-year forecast, and the information is designed to be used as supporting of our budget development process, but it will not be updated throughout the process. So it will show, though, how budget changes in one year do continue and impact future years, and it provides some realistic information as to the impact areas that will be looked at in our upcoming budget process. So although the Board of Education is well aware of these type of items, which is our budgeting process, I did want to bring this up for the community. In fact, that New York State does require that the Board of Education have a balanced budget, which means our revenues and our expenses must equal every year. That each budget year must be approved by the Board of Education and the community, and that we must follow all applicable laws, which include adhering to the tax cap law, providing public notice on the vote dates, and actually having a budget vote, which is held in May. So our budget development process is very extensive, and what I would like to do in this particular situation is just to go over several of the key items. Total revenue is something that's estimated, and also determine the program increase amounts that are necessary to sustain the programs, implement efficiencies and or reallocate the funds as necessary in program needs, and to discuss the preliminary budget. So let me just go back here a bit. We seem to have, okay. So as we move forward, I also want to make mention of the fact that the revenue impact on the tax cap is that no tax levy increase. There is actually no limit to the tax cap vote. But if you do go over that calculation, you need a supermajority to pass that, which is 60%. And the other major factor here is that if you do have a defeated budget more than two times, you will actually have to implement a zero levy increase. And just some historical information here. Last year, there were 13 school districts that proposed budgets above the limit, and 3 of those actually failed. So some information back to our process on what the tax cap impact is on recent history for us. And the important information here shows really 4 items: budget increase, tax cap, levy increase, and state aid. And the factor here to really be kept in mind is that when we had a significant amount of state aid increase, you can see that our levy increases were lower. And so as we, last year is a good example where we actually had a decrease in state aid. You can see that although we were under the tax cap, our levy, our tax cap, and our state aid amounts were, or our budget increase were almost the same. So as we look at some historical items, and the relevance here to the history is that unfortunately what has happened in the past, not just in this slide, but going back many other years, does seem to be cyclical. And we do actually see sometimes where state aid has decreased. What this shows really is that the district had mitigated that through budget reductions, And you can see that in those years where we had the higher reductions, what we had to do was to actually have minimal state aid increases. And then when we did have the increases where in this case it was the GEA or the gap was restored, you can see that our budget reductions then became more minimal. And that would be something that we need to keep in mind if there are future state aid reductions to the district. So looking at the long-range revenue forecast, there are many items that compose our revenue category, but the reality is these items are the major ones which we look at and which we have to really key our budget on. State aid in this forecast is projected to be a 2% increase. That really matches the tax cap message provided by the state, and that represents about $600,000 to the district. Sales tax for this forecast has a minimal change. The tax levy is projected to be under the tax cap amount each year, which is at 2%, and that again is about $2.3 million. Our appropriated reserves are shown, as well as fund balance, to decrease very, very small amounts. The key item here is that if you have a decrease in either of those categories, you have to have a like increase in either revenue or a decrease in expenses. So again, we go back to the balanced budget process. The major expense drivers in our budget, this is not new. They really represent our human resource areas, and it really comes down to the negotiated increases due to contracts for salaries. Social Security payments will increase really due to 3 items. The first item being the growth of our total salary amount, the second item being a change in the actual contribution rate required by the Social Security system, and third by an increase in the maximum Social Security amounts each year. So when those items change, it does result in a need for us to increase our budget in that area. Health insurance is self-funded, as you know, we're self-insured, and so our actual claims are going to determine what occurs in that budget category. And New York State retirement systems, we are receiving those rates from New York State, from those systems. Workers' compensation is a major area for us also in the human resource area. That's due to actual payments that we're making, and of course changes in staffing, retirements, of course, assists us in the budget process, and any other changes to our programs may result in increases to the budget. This information here is a 12-year look at the particular way that our human resource salaries and benefits was shown as a percentage of the total budget. I think the key factors here and the takeaway is that we have really managed the budget pretty well, and what you see over this period of time is that salaries went down by about 4%. Our benefits went up, which is really not surprising considering health insurance costs have risen so dramatically. And in generally speaking, we've actually had a decrease of about 2% over this period. That really is showing that the district did a good job in trying to manage those expenses. The long-range forecast that is included here really is based upon the following items. In salaries, we're looking at some increases of about 3.75% for the first couple years, going to 2.75% for the final years of the forecast. There are no changes in the teacher and employee retirement systems at this point in time. And we actually, when we go further into the budget process, you're going to hear that we are seeing some mixed messages from those systems right now. Health insurance is projected to increase about 4% at the beginning of the forecast and increases to 8% toward the end. Utilities are increasing 5% throughout, and specific areas within the facility budget are expected to increase at 2% each year. And transportation is an area that we have a contractual increase of about $200,000 at the beginning of the forecast and throughout. However, the contract that we have, which was a 5-year contract, expires in 2018-19, and if we are not able to extend the contract, we may be looking at a higher than that $200,000 increase each year if that's not able to occur. So looking at the totals that are included, so if you look at the detail that's included in the forecast, you'll see all the codes that make this up. This is just a summary portion, and essentially speaking, you're seeing that the revenue budget is the one number less the expense number, and in this case, if there's a minus, a negative, it shows that we have to make reductions. The point I want to make here is that it's kind of a cumulative total as you go throughout the forecast. That's why you see the numbers being larger toward the end. If you make those reductions each year, that last number would not be $7.5 million reduction. It would be closer to about 2.5. But the point is that based upon the forecast with the revenue, as I stated, you are seeing the shortfall that's in the budget. The revenue side, again, this is showing where you are when it comes to state aid, tax levy, and some of the other changes. As I said, the district really has those two major categories that is going to be receiving in revenue, and you see that how that increases or results in the levy changes here. So again, keep in mind that we're staying under the tax cap in this forecast, and we're using a 2% increase on state aid. So the key financial summary items here under revenue, again, no major increase in state aid other than a 2%. Expenses, we talked about the human resource side and where they are. There are no new mandates included in this forecast, and as you all are aware, we do receive them from time to time, so that would have a negative impact. And other considerations, as I mentioned, we need to be aware of what may happen if transportation contract can't be extended past 2018-19. And it also does not consider any changes in federal program funding, which could have another severely negative impact if we receive decreases in our federal program funding. So again, some key factors for consideration when we look at future budget development. On the revenue budget really does dictate what our expense reductions are required to be to balance that budget. Control of our expense budget is really done through the main categories, and human resources is our most our highly expenditure area, as we all know. And there is the potential for other significant changes in the expense categories due to the unknown factors. And that really may be more for the future than it is for the upcoming year. Switching gears here, long-range reserve planning. Reserves are part of our general fund appropriated balance, and that's what this presentation is really concentrating on. And there are a few key factors. We want to be able to use those in a way that will help maintain and sustain our programs and minimize any reductions. So that's really the core reason why we appropriate them. We also want to be able to maintain reserve balances for some of those items that are self-funded, and I'll go over that. And we want to acknowledge also that it would be best if we can slowly diminish the amount of those appropriated reserve amounts in our budget at a future point in time. And then again, we want to make sure that whatever plan we have in place, whatever the appropriated reserve levels are, that they're sustainable, because that's what makes our plan actual workable in the future. So what this does is just provide a brief glimpse at the very beginning and the ending of what these reserve balances are. And again, these are not all of our reserves. They're the reserves that are normally appropriated or have been appropriated in our general fund budget. So you can see that over the course of this period of time, there's a projection that they will be reduced, and this is the total reserve balances, by about $1.1 million, or 3.04%. So not a very significant reduction, but a small reduction. The one thing I do want to state here is it's important to, again, go back to those reserves where we're self-funded, which include workers' compensation and unemployment. Those items, we need to be aware we receive third-party reports each year that tell us what the recommended levels are for those reserve amounts. So although it's projected to go down right now in workers' comp and unemployment, that's due to the last reports we received. If we have some higher expenditures in those categories, that same reserve may need to go up. Looking at the next piece, which is our appropriated amounts, these are the amounts that are currently appropriated in our budget, which represent the $9,274,000. And the intention here would be to do a small reduction over the period of this forecast, which would be $300,000, again about 3%. So you can see that they're balanced between reducing the appropriation as well as the total amounts that would be reduced in those reserves also. The key factor, as I said before, is any reduction in the reserve appropriations needs an equal reduction in expense budget or an increase in revenue. So it's not as easily said as done, and we look at it very carefully throughout every budget process. So just in conclusion, the long-range financial plan and reserve plan here, from a budgeting perspective, it's pretty straightforward. We want our revenue increases to equal our expense increases. And what does that do? It gives us our budget stabilization. The long-range financial goal is always to maintain our educational programs by implementing sustainable budgets, which we are all well aware of. And the reserve plan goal is to strategically implement the fund balance reserve appropriations in the revenue budget, and again, making them sustainable. So that's our goal.
Questions, comments? Mr. Mecca.
Thank you for the report. I have several questions, depending on how the president wants me to do it, but I'll start with one, I guess, right? I noticed that there's a big drop in salary and benefits as a percentage of the budget for the 2017-2018 school year. Is this due to the retirement incentive?
Yes.
Okay. All right. That's my first question. Should I keep going?
Continue, please.
Thanks. The busing contract with Student Transportation of America, I know we had, where are we in that contract right now?
We're in the 4th year of a 5-year contract.
Okay, thanks. That's all I'll say about that one, I guess. I have talked to other people in other districts, though, that are renegotiating their transportation contracts, and they said pretty much what you said, is that the cost isn't going down when they're renegotiating, unfortunately. So part of the long-range plan is to gradually reduce our reserve balances, and that you state that they're not a viable revenue option in the future. Is that just because we can't sustain funding them due to the state budgets that are predicted in the future, or is it due to the criticism that we've received for having fund balances that are too high in the past? Or because it seems to me the more money you have in reserve, the better.
It's actually the New York State Comptroller did not say that we had incorrect reserve amounts. They actually said that our reserves were properly funded based upon their review. I think the concern that I have is that as the budget becomes a lot tighter with less state aid coming in, we may not have the ability to have fund balance to put back into those reserves at the end of each fiscal year.
Gotcha, thanks. One more question. I don't know if you're aware of the Board of Regents today making their ask. As someone that doesn't understand that process really well, can you give some color on what that means? So that today the Board of Regents announced the percentages of increase that they would like to see, I guess, from the state, and I guess that's just a wish list. Is that the correct way to interpret that information?
It is. I think what I took away from that is that last year, I believe, they requested $2.6 billion. This year, they're about 1.6 or somewhere around there. The governor provided 1.1 billion last year. So their reduction, I think, is an indicator that they realize the funding may not be there. We don't know what will happen, but I think the fact that they've reduced their, and that's the takeaway I have, the fact that they reduced their request quite significantly is something we just all need to be aware of.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Other questions, comments? On the transportation contract that's expiring, what are the chances that we can get an extension?
I have had conversations, and I think that I can't commit to anything at this point, but I'm hoping we can do that.
Fair enough. Thank you. Thank you. Would someone like to make a motion to resolve to approve the property tax settlement as presented, please? Ms. Speaker, second. Ms. Van Cise, thank you. Any discussion? Yes, Mr. Meyer.
Could somebody give a little bit of more background information on this tax settlement? Was this by court order? I'm just looking at the sheet here, and it says it has been ordered that the total assessment be reduced from $1.7 million to $925,000. Is that a result of a court order, or is it a misuse of words, or what?
Machersky, would you like to comment on that, please?
Yes, all of the items that are presented to the board are due to court order, and they are agreed upon by all the taxing jurisdictions. So the town of Amherst was involved in this. Our school district attorney representing us was involved in this also.
Thank you.
Other comments, questions? This is one of those that Mr. Machersky knows well that I always challenge. I will say every single time we get one of these, the first thing I do is I go to Google and put the addresses in to find out where these really are and who they are. And I don't mean to not pick on people, but this is Key Bank on Transit Road. And I will say that this is probably, of a lot of the settlements that we've seen, this is probably a lot fairer, I think. This is about a 10% reduction compared to some of these that are going 50, 80 plus %, which I think is ridiculous. So, but thank you. So all in favor? Opposed? Abstentions?
I'm going to abstain, and I'm just going to state that it's because I work in the town attorney's office for the town of Amherst.
Fair enough. Thank you. Motion carries 8-0-1. If you have any liaison or conference reports, please pass them to Mrs. Serafin. Please send your reports within 2 days of a meeting if at all possible. Does anyone need any coverage for any upcoming meetings in the next month or so? I know with the holiday in between, there's probably a vast majority of meetings that will not be attended. They won't be held. Mrs. Leatherborough.
I may possibly. The High Middle meeting is the same date as the concert that takes place between Heim, Casey, and North, I believe.
What day is that?
I don't know. I'll have to go back and look. But last year, the PTA ended up changing the date of their meeting due to that same scheduling conflict, so they may do that again.
That's side-by-side concert?
Side-by-side
It's
concert?
January 10th I have in my calendar.
Oh.
But I guess, yeah.
Last year, the PTA decided to change the date like 2 days before because they realized of the conflict. It's scheduled again the same day as the concert, so we can just play it by ear.
No problem, yeah. Let us know, please. Any other questions, comments, concerns for having coverage? Great. Are there any legislative matters that anyone would like to discuss? Would someone like to make a motion to resolve to approve the Curriculum Council recommendations as presented? Mrs. Van Cise, second. Dr. McClary, any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Opposed, abstentions, motion carries unanimously. Would someone like to make a motion to resolve to approve the funding and the agreement between the Superintendent of Schools and the Williamsville Teachers Association as presented? Mr. Mecca, second. Dr. McClary, is there any discussion? Okay, all in favor? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Mecca, did you have something?
I was just going to say that I'm glad that we were able to reach a settlement on the contract. So,
all in favor?
Good work by the district negotiating team.
Thank you. Any other comments before I go on again?
Sorry about that.
It's okay. It's quite all right. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Would someone like to make a motion to resolve to approve the abolishing of the Director of Employee Negotiations position as recommended? Mrs. Van Cise, thank you. Second. Mrs. Beeger, any discussion? Mr. Meyer?
Yeah, could somebody just give me some information as to why this is recommended?
Dr. Martzloff?
Yes, this is a position that has been vacant for about 2 years, and we feel that the position in the next agenda item better represents the type of position we'd like to utilize to provide services to the district.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay, all in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Would someone like to make a motion to resolve to approve the new position for Labor Relations Specialist as recommended? Mr. Mecca, is there a second? Mrs. Beeger, any discussion? Mr.
Follow-up question that naturally follows here. Why does this one more naturally suit the position?
Because this particular position allows for an attorney as a labor relations specialist background to be able to qualify for the position, which is something I know the Board of Education is interested in trying to limit our legal costs and things of that nature as much as we can in this particular area.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay, all in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. There are no district facilities and support services matters to discuss this month, as well as there are no special needs and student activities to discuss. Does anyone have a request or matter to discuss under the committee of the whole? Okay. All right. Would someone like to make a motion to meet in executive session to continue our discussion on employment matters relating to a particular person's collective negotiations pursuant to Article 14 of the Civil Service Law and current litigation? Nader, is there a second? Mrs. Beeger? All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Would someone like to make a motion to return the regular board meeting to public session? Vasquez, second. Mrs. Beeger? All in favor? Mr. Mack is absent. It's okay. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, approved. Yeah. 8-0-0. Is Mr. Mecca, did he depart for the evening?
Sure.
He may have.
No.
Oh, here he is. Thank you, Mr. Mecca. Would someone like to make a motion to resolve to approve the superintendent's determination to continue to place teacher Patrick Murray on paid leave pending continued review and investigation into the performance of his duties effective immediately? Mrs. Van Cise, second. Dr. Venator, any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Our next regular board meeting will be on January 9th, 2018, with public session starting at 7 p.m. Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn the regular board meeting? Mr. Meyer, second. Dr. McClary, all in favor? Opposed? Nobody opposes? Abstention? Nothing? Okay. Motion carries unanimously. Happy holidays, everyone.